Aloha, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see people here. If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat and where you're logging in from, that would be great. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, I'll get started, and there's plenty of time for the people logging in still. So I want to welcome everyone, say aloha. My name is Andrea Nandoskar. I'm the Education Program Director at Historic Hawaii Foundation, and I want to thank you for joining us today for Lecture 2 of the 2026 Annual Experts Historic Preservation Lecture Series. The series is curated and co-sponsored by the UH School of Architecture's Historic Preservation Graduate Certificate Program and Historic Hawaii Foundation. This year's theme is Preserving Hawaii's Parks, and today's presenter will speak about Kapi olani Park in Waikīkī, Oahu. It's both its history and preservation efforts and challenges. Just a note, all of the lectures are being recorded and will be posted to both the event page and HHF's YouTube channel, usually the same day, if not a day or so later. So check back there and feel free to share with your friends and community. If you have questions throughout, please keep track of those. You can type them in the chat or wait for the Q&A. And we'll do our best to address as many as we can with our presenter. We'll also be doing, again, a brief survey at the end. So when you log off of the webinar, if you would take a couple of minutes and just provide some feedback about today's lecture, that would be awesome. For those who may be new to Historic Hawaii Foundation, we are a statewide nonprofit. We help people save historic places. These are sites that tell the stories of the multi-layered history of Hawaii. We do this through education, advocacy, assistance, and protection of and for historic places. I'd now like to introduce our series co-host, Dr. William Chapman, who will introduce today's presenter, and I hope you enjoy the lecture. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Aloha mai kako. It's a great pleasure to be host again to the series. This is a series that began back in 1986, so we're either in our 39th or 40th year. It's always a bone of contention. And I think we could arguably say it's 40th, but we posted it as 39th. It was begun by William Murtaugh, who began the graduate program in historic preservation at UH Manoa. It used to be located in American Studies, but now we're in architecture. And I stepped down after 7 years as dean, and I'm now a professor of architecture. And we're hoping to build the program toward a master's level. So anybody with an interest, or with a niece or nephew or child who has an interest in preservation, please put them in touch with me. So let me go ahead and move to the introduction, which is the most pleasurable part of the show. I'm really pleased to introduce Alethea Rebman. Alethea has been board president of the Kapi olani Preservation Society, Park Preservation Society, for nearly 20 years. She's been carrying forward their mission of the founders of that society to preserve the park by unearthing and defending the park's irrevocable public charitable trust. She's a lawyer, a runner, a sailor, and she works with a diverse board that includes an arborist, an ocean conservationist, a scientist, a communications expert, and a real estate expert, all working together to keep Kapi olani Park free and open to the public. So I gave a little bit of background history to Kapi olani Park last week, but I kept it wide open for Alethea to give us a more fulsome story. So thank you very much for joining us today. Look forward to your talk.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrea. As Bill said, I'm the president of Kapi olani Park Preservation Society. It's been around for about as long as this series, and I'll go into that more later. These are the topics that Historic Hawaii wanted developed a little bit in the introduction. Where, what, when, and by whom developed and used the park, and why is it significant? So I hope to be able to cover those things today. And if you have additional questions, of course, you can always put them in the chat. I think we probably all know where Kapi olani Park is. It's right there. As you drive out of the Waikīkī Strip, you'll be surrounded by parkland. And in fact, you will be on parkland because Kalākaua Avenue is part of the trust. It's about 200 acres, and it includes the Waikīkī Shell and the zoo. Okay, so one thing before we move on is it is not Kapi olani Regional Park. We differ on that. The name of the park, as it was dedicated, is Kapi olani Park. The regional portion is just how the city designates its place in the parks that it manages. And again, I'll come back to that. This is a nice page from the city's very nice website on Kapi olani Park. Okay. So Kapi olani Park has tennis courts, it has rugby, it has beach access, it has soccer, lacrosse, everything else. What it doesn't have, other than the zoo, which is its own park attraction, and the Shell, which is a public park use, is commercial activity outside of the special events. And that's because of the terms of the charitable trusts that govern the park. Kapi olani Park is the only public charitable trust in Hawaii, and they're not common even across the country. They're not necessarily the same as land trusts, foundations, conservation, and the like that we're probably more familiar with as a way to protect public lands. So a charitable trust, as you see, it's created to benefit a specific purpose. And in the case of Kapi olani Park, it's to benefit the general public. And you can see it's also termed a public trust and charitable use. So looking at the history, the book, which was published in 2002 by KPPS and a number of generous sponsors, is old now, but it's still the definitive book on the park. I know in last week's lecture by Mr. Chapman, he mentioned Robert Wyanoth. Wyanoth wrote this book, and McKinnon Simpson did the text sidebars and I think assembled some of the photos. Now, not everybody agreed on everything that went into this book. So there's a few differing opinions, but it still remains the only book on the park. So as Wyanoth says in his introduction to the book, despite the distinctiveness of the royal pedigree being created as a private reserve for a monarch and being dedicated for public use by the King of Hawaii in the 1870s, it has evolved since then in ways similar to other parks. So Kapi olani Park's development is both informed by its unique history and the fairly unusual trust that still governs it, and what public urban parks are becoming. Okay, so there's an appealing narrative that King Kalākaua had the foresight to set this aside for public recreation and dedicated it to his consort, Queen Kapi olani. Okay, so that's appealing, but it is not that simple. It was dedicated by the king, and he did have foresight. So here's Queen Kapi olani and King Kalākaua, the park's creator. These slides are from the book. But Kapi olani Park was first established by a private corporation, and they wanted an exclusive oceanfront retreat. They formed the Kapi olani Park Association in November of 1876, and the main goal was residences for its stockholders, who were the leading businessmen of the day. And a first-class horse racing track is the focal point of their country suburb. Back then, Kapi olani Park's current area was a country suburb. It wasn't easy to get to. So it took money and leisure time to come to Kapi olani Park then. Here's one of the certificate of stock shares. And It was formed by King Kalākaua and Alan Herbert leasing land to the association, with King Kalākaua leasing 300 acres of crown land for $1 a year to the association. Herbert charged a whole $24 a year. And yes, they both had stock and they both planned homes there. The bylaws for that Kapi olani Park Association had wording about a place of public resort and converting into a public park, but the goal was essentially suburban development at that time. They were conscious that this should be seen, though, to serve the public, given the prime land that it was and their social consciousness. And they pointed out at the time that it could serve as a place for agricultural promotions, which was consistent with King Kalākaua's desire to turn Hawaii into a sugar kingdom at that time. So in dedication day speeches, both King Kalākaua and James Herbert asserted it would be a public space, quote, place of innocent refreshment, a large public park that a city needs to be truly civilized, where families could find refreshment and recreation in the kindly influences of nature. So in the larger park context that was influencing them also across the country, parks were becoming more popular for the reason that reformers thought, one of the reasons, it would lead the working man away from drink to be out in the kindly influences of nature. So there was a social utility to parks, and there still is, of course. And the reasons behind their dedication and their acknowledgement of the need for public access are probably even a little more complex, but the driving force was homes for society leaders. So they were efficient in distributing the lots, building infrastructure, and so on. And by the 80s, the vision seemed complete. They had charming villas and seaside mansions, and they created the first-class racing course. And they teamed up with the Jockey Club to share expenses. And they had other sources of revenue also to support the public area of the park. And one of them was this ostrich farm. It's kind of a funny picture. And still, they were asking for funds from the legislature by 1881. And that kind of led to vague inquiries by the legislature into the public benefits, since they were helping to fund it. But the legislature didn't really pursue that much. Okay. So what did change as the public came to the park and KPA turned its attention into the park itself was the infrastructure and the roads. Scenic roads and water features were created. And here's a picture of Makee Island, the footbridge that they created. So this association had control of the park until 1896, when it went into the hands of a new organization, the Honolulu Park Commission. Archibald Scott Cleghorn was its chair. He was the husband of Princess Likelike, and therefore he was the brother of King Kalākaua and Queen Liliuokalani, his successor. He was a landscape gardener, and his influence is seen throughout the park. At the time, he transformed Ainahau Estate, of course, Emma Square, Thomas Square, and he helped landscape Iolani Palace. He's considered the father of the Honolulu park system. So here's Princess Ka'iolani and family at Ainahau, and the attribution for this should be on there, but it's not. It's from the state archives. So the commission was a public agency charged with operating the park as a public recreation ground for all the citizens of Honolulu. It was not a municipal agency, and its only job was to manage Kapi olani Park. This was under the government of the Republic of Hawaii, which was the government from 1894 to 1898. And that's when management of the park went from private hands into public hands. So in 1896, the legislature enacted Act 53, and that's a future slide. And it provided that the park was to be permanently set aside as a free public park and recreation ground forever. Act 53 is what put possession, control, and management into the Honolulu Park Commission. And the trustees were initially appointed by the President of the Republic and Kapi olani Park Association. So the legislature specifically withheld from the commission, in just a moment, let me go through my slides here, withheld from the commission the authority to lease or sell land in the park. Okay. These are the powers that they did give to them: prevent trespass, maintain the roads, maintain it, and so on. These are the powers that eventually passed to the Honolulu City and County of Honolulu. And of course, we'll talk about that. Here's another restriction. The commission was not to have the authority to compel the payment of an entrance fee as a condition to the admission to any one of the grounds of the park, provided that the said commission may authorize the proprietors or management of any special entertainment or exhibition which may be permitted within the park limits to charge and collect fees for admission to such entertainment or exhibition. And with Act 53 and the authorities given to the Honolulu Park Commission, the parameters were set for what could happen to the park. So this is a map from 1912. You can see the Crown lands, Kaneloa, and you can see Kapua off to the right side. And these lots along the edge of Leahi Avenue, and to a lesser extent along the oceanfront, the other side of Kalākaua Avenue, remain either in the park or at issue today. So the 3 land transfers were done into the park by the terms of Act 53, where KPA assigned land to the Republic of Hawaii, and the Republic reassigned those lands to the Honolulu Park Commission, and by Irwin deeding land that he held in the park to the Republic of Hawaii, who assigned it to the commission. So Irwin deeded only a portion of his land, and he retained sections that he formerly leased to KPA. But there's some confusion because Act 53 described the conveyance as, referring to Irwin, quote, that part of his said fee simple premises now under lease to the Kapi olani Park Association that lies within the park proper. So a lease on Irwin's property to somebody else that was canceled on a portion lying outside the boundaries of the park proper at the time was canceled, making it seem as though the entire parcel traditionally used as a park was transferred. It was not. And when I say there's some confusion, I don't mean there's confusion over what happened. There was confusion at the time. Okay. But there was a third transfer, and that was park lands leased to Irwin by KPA. So the Republic essentially withdrew those from the park and gave them to Irwin. This was about 10 acres, half oceanfront and half between Leahi and Paki. Irwin's leases were the only ones converted to fee simple and private ownership. This means, as a result of all these transfers, the resulting park boundaries were considerably smaller than what KPA had. When Cleghorn returned from the trip to see what had happened, he was unhappy and suggested that King Kalākaua would not have wanted those lands to be out of the government's hands. This is not implying that anybody did anything wrong. It's just that this was the result of the transfers. And it should bear some weight what Cleghorn, who was involved at the time, said about what King Kalākaua might have wanted. So the Republic did at least 3 other and later land transfers to lessees in the park. In total, the Republic oversaw conversion of 31 oceanfront lots into private ownership, which was over 60% of the beachfront between Kapahulu and Sans Souci Beach. So Honolulu Park Commission existed until 1913. Irwin was the chair. They were short on funding, but they undertook landscape and design. The superintendent first hired Asian immigrants, but when made to hire American citizens, he hired prisoners to meet his budget restrictions. So this is around the time that mainland park trends really influenced the trustees, and they sought funds to turn areas into active recreation grounds. So efforts were interrupted by what I think we all know as Camp McKinley. This was a request for, oh, there's Dillingham Fountain. I'll mention Dillingham in a little while. The Army demanded permanent use of this site after the trustees had reluctantly let them use it. The trustees declined, and about 9 years later, the troops were evicted. And the Army was billed and paid for the extensive damage that they had done. So the encampment of the military brought out local citizens who wanted to put up refreshment stands. And the trustees allowed it because they needed the money for $25 a month with the restriction that no alcohol could be sold. And these were the first public food concessions in the park. And one of the things that most people know about Kapi olani Park is that they used to have polo there. So through the influence of Walter Dillingham, the first polo match was played in the park in 1902, and it displaced the horse racing that had been there. At the same time, baseball, which was an elite sport, started being played in the park. So you can kind of get the sense that it was still kind of an elite place. And keep in mind that at that time, there was no public beach access. Okay. So the first facility for the public that opened was a small aquarium in 1904. And it was constructed by the Honolulu Rapid Transit and Land Company to give people a reason to ride their streetcars. And they installed electric lights using ground power that they installed, which made evening entertainment at the bandstand possible. So this is the first time the non-polo playing public had reason to go to the park. So why did private interests shape the park like this? Because the commission relied on appropriations and gifts, usually from wealthy citizens living near the park. They received some income from the sporting association. Irwin's farm would sometimes advance funds for the park, and they sold algaroba beans from the park. So funds were tight. In 1905, Act 103 declared that various properties in the city would no longer be leased out, but would become public parks. And that included 14 Waikīkī beachfront lots in the park. They acquired 7 parks this way, and this was the first time that the park had beach access for the public. This transformed Kapi olani Park into a beach park. So what this means for us today is that beach access and oceanfront access are indeed a part of Kapi olani Park. They need to be guarded, and they need to be free and open to the public. So in 1913, the territory transferred administrative authority over the park to the city. And this is Act 103. This is administrative authority only. It is not ownership. This is the current status of the park and the trust. So in 1915, the Honolulu Zoo was established when the park officials wanted a more elaborate setups for the peacocks and the pigeons that were there. And they also had a few emus, strangely enough. They ended up with a zoo. And if anybody remembers, Daisy, the African elephant, she was the big hit of the zoo. She rebelled in 1993, and that was with fatal consequences to her keeper. So the natatorium was opened in 1927. The natatorium land itself was not and is not in the trust. It was purchased in 1919 by the legislature from Irwin. It remains state land. But the land around it, including the Memorial Park, is in the park trust. The Waikīkī Shell opened in 1954, the Kodak Hula Show. It was a free hula show that had operated for 32 years here by the natatorium. It was evicted from the beachfront by Mayor Frank Fosse in 1969, who found it too commercial for the beachfront. And that was really the start of the controversies over commercialism, which are in a certain way ongoing today. Frank Fosse also pulled down the structure, let me find it, that had Queen's Surf with Spence in the middle. Okay. And it had started life as a private residence for one of the shareholders, and then it became a rest and recreation facility for aviators, and then Spence Cliff ran it as a restaurant and nightclub. So this trust that governs Kapi olani Park being a public charitable trust, it must have a purpose recognized as serving the public, a public benefit. So the federal tax code defines charitable purposes, of course. And these trusts are very different also from private trusts in that they can continue in perpetuity. Private trusts end according to a certain doctrine on the lives and being at the time the trust is created. These can continue forever. The only way the terms can be changed is by an equitable doctrine called CPRE, which allows modification if the purpose becomes impossible or impractical to carry out. I kind of use the example of a bird sanctuary and the birds have all gone extinct. That doesn't mean there's not a need for help for birds or sanctuary for something else, just that the original purpose is not possible. At that point, somebody applies to a court and the court will direct application of the assets to a charitable purpose that is close to but not the same, with the goal of carrying out the donor's intent as much as possible. So the point of those definitions and the limits that are even on a probate court to modify a public charitable trust mean that whenever possible, the terms of the original trust are carried out. But over the years, the knowledge of this public charitable trust was lost. It fell by the wayside. The city was administering Kapi olani Park and they treated it as they treated their other parks. But it was still there. It doesn't just go away. So it's natural. You're paying for something and you're administering it, you're doing all the work, and you feel ownership of it. And that, for us, ties back into the name of the park, with the city adding regional to the park. KPPS would very much like to see the correct signage, partly because forgetting that the city doesn't own the park caused a lot of problems over the years, and because we like to preserve the history. That applies to signage that calls it Queen Kapi olani Regional Park. It keeps getting a little bit further away from the original dedication of the park. So in 1986, as part of their administration of the park, the city decided to rent out an acre of land fronting the zoo for a 7-unit fast food complex that included a Burger King with 15-year leases. And in return, the concessionaires would build a 7,500 square foot restaurant with an outdoor food hall, a nightclub, indoor seating for at least 200, and a banquet hall. They would be required to spend at least $1.5 million, and the city would own the building at the end of the leases. The city saw this as an ingenious way to pay for the costs of maintaining the zoo and the park. And the city actually entered into an agreement with Pentagram, which owned Burger King in Hawaii, to construct and operate all this. And the state BLNR approved the plans in January of 1987. Oh, there's a Kapi olani Regional Park creeping into an online search. This is just a Google search, so I'm kind of going back for a moment. But Queen Kapi olani Regional Park. So Burger King. The city was also considering, because they had success with this, a similar arrangement at the Shell. But the public saw it as commercialization and an extension of tourism into the park from Waikīkī. Public reaction to this was much stronger than reaction to Mayor Fosse's Queen's Surf or Kodak Hula Show positions. The public was not convinced by the park director's argument that this was just like when he bought peanuts at the zoo when he was a child. You can now buy Burger King at the zoo. So as you see, this was the advertiser cartoonist at the time. This captured the public sentiment. And this sense of rightness of this cause prevailed in the end, of course. And the attorney who took this case to the Supreme Court liked this well enough that he still has it up on the wall in his office. That's Carol Taylor, who took the case to the Supreme Court. And that happened by a group of citizens feeling that this could not be right. Can it really be allowed? Can they do this? And they researched the laws. They found the original Park Dedication, Act 53, Act 163, making the park a public charitable trust. They took that to the city who essentially told them it's outdated and it does not apply. So what do you do with that information now? The people who are running it tell you, no, we're not going to do anything. So how do you enforce it? So this is the legal doctrine that they use, parens patriae. And it's as you see, this is how the government has standing to enforce a public charitable trust. And so the first party with the standing to sue on behalf of a public charitable trust is always the state attorney general of the state where the trust was created, because land is a state-by-state matter. The public usually doesn't have the power to sue, even though they're the beneficiaries, because the attorney general stands in for them. And it's the attorney general's responsibility to enforce the trust and to protect the trust assets. The citizens took this trust to the attorney general's office and asked them to enforce it, and the AG declined. So the citizens formed Kapi olani Park Preservation Society, and in 1987 they filed suit. So I don't want to make this sound like an easy process, just something they did in their spare time. These people went door to door, knocking on doors, gathering donations, getting public support. Some of them were quite prominent citizens, and many of them were women. I understand that they received pressure at home from the husbands not to embarrass themselves, but these people did it for the Hawaii that they loved. So KPPS believed that it had standing to sue since the attorney general would not defend the trust. The city court dismissed the lawsuit on summary judgment, but ultimately in 1988, KPPS prevailed in what we call the Burger King case. It's really Kapi olani Park Preservation Society versus Honolulu. And the opinion itself was quite strongly worded. And the Supreme Court made it clear that where a government agency, as trustee of a charitable trust, is on notice that there is a genuine question within the terms of the trust as to its power to dispose of a portion of the trust res, meaning the body of the trust, and proceed with the transaction, instead of seeking instructions of the court, and the attorney general, as parens patriae, also knowing the existence of a genuine question, supports the trustee's position, members of the public, as beneficiaries of the trust who use the park, have standing to bring the matter to the attention of the court. That also gives clear direction now to the trustees of the park and the attorney general. When there's a genuine question, they must bring it to the probate court. In this portion of the Supreme Court's decision, they made it clear that it is beyond the power of the legislature or anybody else to go against the trust. Basically, the trust stands as it is. It can't be modified. Okay. So at the bottom, which I bolded, it wasn't bolded in the original, we hold that the act did not give the city as trustee the power to lease or deed all or portions of the park, which the appellees claim the city has, meaning the power. Okay. And perhaps most pertinent today is their language of an agreement to turn over a specified portion of the park premises for restaurant use to a concessionaire at a fixed rental for a fixed term without the power of withdrawal, and so on, was a lease and not a license, despite the name given to it by the parties. So when restrictions are put up, our Supreme Court knows, I think we all know, the tendency then is to say, how can I get to where I need to go? And the Supreme Court thought of that. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Doesn't matter what you call it. And I think of it in less elegant terms of walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Okay. So here's the language about an agreement to turn over a portion of the park premises. along with a picture from the Star Advertiser archives of Mayor Eileen Anderson in 1981 dedicating the Kapi olani driving range, which seems like a great idea, but it was a lease. And after that ruling, which was in 1988, the Supreme Court sent it back to the trial level court to make orders that would effectuate its findings and conclusions of law. It went to Judge Philip Chun, and we just refer to this as the 1991 Judge Chun order. These amended findings of fact and conclusions of law set out a lot of the details on what is allowed, what isn't. That driving range, not allowed. Other things, allowed. This is how this will be handled. And so we still use that along with a few later rulings that are not as comprehensive, since Judge Chun already addressed a lot of these things. So later proceedings included land swaps as the city transferred land out of the trust over the years. This is a 1998 stipulation order transferring land to the trust. KPPS was still involved at that point, as you see there, with KPPS on the left side as an intervener defendant, because the city was bringing this to see what basically was allowed. So an interesting thing is that the fire station, which is 2.5 acres, was on trust land, and so was a portion of Jefferson Elementary. There are arguably disagreements on the wording of the resulting transfers and whether Kapi olani Park would be entitled to any of the land under those two entities if they are no longer being used for another purpose, but that will wait another day. Okay. And in this period and through this order, this is how the War Memorial Park by the natatorium was placed into the trust. And what it means for land to be in or out of the trust goes back to that original grant. Free and open to the public forever. Can they charge admission? What can you do? Does it have trust restrictions on it? The city has kept a number of the lots that were identified as not originally being in the trust. And the goal for us is to have those lands back in the trust someday. They were once part of Kapi olani Park and should be again, and they should have the protection of the trust. So as to enforcing it, I think of it in terms of two types of enforcement, one being daily and one enforcement of the trust. And this is what I always say, everyone wants a piece of the park. Prime land, oceanfront, just sitting there. We, as Kapi olani Park Preservation Society, have no power over the land. We don't have any authority over it. But by the virtue of the name, we get inquiries over time, and people have a lot of good ideas. We could put a skate park there. Honolulu needs a skate park. Honolulu does need a skate park, but that would mean dedicating an area of the park to just one group. So that's on the trust enforcement side. So the daily type is more of a constant struggle of little things. Is it a commercial entity getting park permits for large portions of the park? It may be. And then that gets reported and they should look into it. This is a picture of a hot dog stand that was set up in front of the zoo. And this is where daily enforcement gets difficult. What's wrong with a hot dog stand at the zoo, right? And then we go back to the original Burger King case. And a lot of it is either the trust is there, valid, and it has clearly stated purposes and rules, or it doesn't. So no unauthorized commercial activity on the park lands. And, the hot dog vendor did move on. Okay. So citizens still want their parks to be non-commercial, and particularly this one, the largest park on Oahu. surf school vans set up oceanfront, violation of the parking limits on Kalākaua Avenue. The parking limits on Kalākaua Avenue are short, and they're meant to be short to allow people to access the park. If you ever park down there on the metered side, it's the old time thing, which is I think like 25 cents or 50 cents an hour or whatever. Metered prices didn't go up when the rest of the city parking prices went up to allow access to the park for families and keep it actually open to the public, not prohibitive. You don't have to pay $5 to go have a picnic in the park, and that's deliberate. For a while there, camper van rentals were touting the park as a hotel alternative. Great, rent a van, stay in beautiful Kapi olani Park. So there are so many uses, and many of the people, once we talk to them, don't see it as something wrong. Other people say, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And so that turns it back over to the city council, which is kind of where it belongs, and to the police department. The police are not enthused about being there to chase away yoga schools that have 40 people and charge $25 a person. That's not really their kuleana. But there is no specific mechanism to do that other than the police. So when in its 1988 order, the Supreme Court transferred the trusteeship to the city council as being another agency, it made sense in a lot of ways. The city council is there, they help manage the money, and in theory, they can put on their trustee hat instead of their city council hat. But there are so many different things for them to consider. I think it's impossible for them to take off their trustee hat. And this is the sort of thing, along with other controversies that have come along, like where the city wants to serve alcohol on the beach for a Pro Bowl event. Is that special treatment? Yes, it is, but they want to do it for their own purposes. And any part of the trust that gets chipped away, in our view, endangers all of the trust. And I think we have the history to show us that's what happens. And there is a place where the city does a great job in enforcement, and that's in the sharing of the recreational spaces in the park. If you'll notice, other than the tennis courts, there are no set sporting areas. So the same areas are used for soccer, they're used for cricket, they're used for rugby or whatever it is. And that is very much by design. The sports equipment is kept movable so that everybody can use the park. We've worked with the city on this, and we appreciate it when they come to us. We've walked the park with the cricket people, talked about removable pitches and that sort of thing. It can be done. So the other type of commercial use is when it attracts the attention of businesses or people with ideas. I think I mentioned that, but without the park protection that it has, it would be the site of the convention center, market kiosks, luau's, a 12,000 square foot training center that actually got to the point of blueprints, oceanfront, and there's a lot more. Are those things inherently bad? Of course not. So the challenges remain. Everyone wants a piece of the park. So we have to take great care to keep this resource and public asset open to the public. This means working through master plans over the years, responding efforts to allocate space to various entities, and so on. There are some positive things that we get to do, providing education, planting trees on Arbor Day, working with the city sometimes on historic matters, and keeping people informed, and so on. So one of the things that KPPS does is try to keep expanding knowledge of the park. Excuse the typo here at the top and look at the name on the first line. It's Kupalaha. It's a heiau that was believed to have been lost over the years. And one of our board members, who is an astronomer, searched in the archives of the Republic and found the heiau, which is under Montserrat Avenue now, and it's oriented toward the Pleiades, which fits in with his research on other heiaus between the Big Island and Maui oriented toward the Pleiades. So it tells us something about astronomy at the time, about navigation, about beliefs. And it is our goal to keep doing that. We keep working on the maps of the park, and we've joined in with some other lawsuits on the theory of you can't allow the park to be chipped away. This is our most recent Supreme Court case. I bolded Kapi olani Park Preservation Society, and this was a matter of a use at Sans Souci at Kaimana Beach Hotel, and the Director of Planning and Permitting allowing a use that basically couldn't be grandfathered in. And our attorneys took it all the way through, Department of Planning and Permitting, and so on. And Dane Miller and Wilma Sir argued at the Hawaii Supreme Court and got a ruling on the authority of the director, which affects the park now. So going back to the 1991 order and the city council becoming trustees, we would ultimately like to see that burden taken from them, because it is a burden on them, and they do have to share competing interests of their constituents sometimes and the trust. Corp Council advises incoming city councils on their duties as trustees. Sometimes a new council will ask us to come and do a presentation, which of course we're delighted to do, because there are different perspectives on this. One perspective is how much can we do? And the other one is what can you maybe not do? So our goal is to present information and a different perspective, because we have no other hat. There's no other goal. There's nothing like it would be nice, or there's no other place for it to go that the city can afford. KPPS's sole mission is to preserve the park trust terms. So there's another challenge, is that city administrations themselves also have their own goals and their own pressures, and they look to Kapi olani Park. There is a present challenge where the city desires to take 2 lots on Leahi Avenue, going back to that 1912 map with all the lots shown, out of the trust, and in return, take the Waikīkī most parcel here, which is 2.21 acres, and put that into the trust. So their goal is to expand ocean safety in those 2 lots on Leahi Avenue. But the loss of those 2 lots would mean that the Rolling Hills area of Kapi olani Park isn't going to be linked up. And of course, it's doubtful whether, not doubtful, it's uncertain whether the probate court would even allow this. From KPPS's point of view, putting this land parcel, this oceanfront, as nice as oceanfront sounds, would not necessarily benefit the trust. This is the site of Sunset on the Beach. This is the site of a lot of activities that probably should go on, their park uses, but whether they violate the trust, we don't know. Furthermore, that's an unbuildable parcel. And I'm no climate change expert, but other people are. And at a certain point, that will be underwater. It's also in an SMA permitting zone, and it's unlikely that it could be built on. What KPPS would like to see is the land along the left side of that map put into the trust. And that would give a little more cohesion to the land on the other side of the aquarium and the land on the other side of Kalākaua Avenue, and make it more clear for enforcement purposes that Kalākaua Avenue is indeed in the trust. The city has told us the same thing that they've said for a long time, which is we would like to see Kapi olani Park Trust land extend Mauka to Makai. And they could do that if they wished, except for this state of Hawaii parcel in the middle, they could transfer it all into the trust. And that would go to our ultimate goal, which is to have separate rules for Kapi olani Park that acknowledge the park trust. There are problems with funding, there are problems with management, but it would preserve the trust in a way that it is not currently acknowledged by the operating entities. And again, I'm not faulting them, I'm saying it's for their own reason. This could be something similar to Hanauma Bay as a separate preserve. It could be something as simple as making separate rules for Kapi olani Park and having a separate regional park and Kapi olani Park as a step in the right direction.
Alethea, I should give you a 10-minute warning here. You may want to even pull it a little shorter so that we have a little chance for questions.
Thank you, Bill. I'm almost done here. The last part is needs of the park and ways to get involved. Of course, all parks need care. What that looks like, I don't know whether you participate in cleanups or that kind of thing. It doesn't need money itself per se, since money from the park comes into the general fund and comes out of the general park. If it becomes its own entity, it may well then need donations. It needs involvement, right to the city when you see something. You can CC us, we collect these and share them with the city. Advocates are needed for preservation. This Price building at the zoo was preserved through the work of citizen advocates. Okay, so there are a number of things to do along the way, but a lot of it is simply remaining involved. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, that kind of thing. Keep in contact with us and please spend time in the park. Thank you. Can I ask if there's any questions?
Thank you very much, Alethea. That was very interesting overview of a lot of the legal issues facing the park. I think a lot of us don't even know, but that's a problem. You know, we take it kind of for granted. Andrea has a question here. Andrea, do you want to go ahead and make it, or do you want me to read it from the chat?
Thanks, Bill. I'm having trouble. Can you hear me? Oh, there.
Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question. I had two questions. One, Alethea, while we're waiting, and others, please do put your questions in the chat. Is KPPS the sole organization that is really monitoring and in charge from your mission, due to your mission, to really make sure that the trust is aligned, you know, activities are aligned? Are there other organizations or people doing that?
Oh, sorry, as far as I know, we are currently the only one. For a while, there was another one kind of alongside us, but I believe we're the only one now.
Great, thank you. And then the other question, because I still don't see any new questions in the chat, is with the climate, you had brought up climate change and encroaching sea level rise. With predictions that have been done at UH, Chip Fletcher and others, are there certain actions or mitigation efforts that are underway to plan or think about activities, mitigation to protect pieces of the park? Or if not, what will happen? Has there been given any thought to that? Thank you.
I have never seen anything on that other than the state efforts off Waikīkī to preserve sand and so on. So I don't know of any current efforts or in front of Kapi olani Park.
Thank you, Alethea.
Yeah, and if I can say that is some of the best beach access we have left on this side. And so it would be terrible if that was lost for lack of planning.
Is everybody else? Please don't be shy. If you have some questions, add them please to the chat and we can voice those for you.
While we're waiting, Alethea, can you talk a little bit about some of if there are historic resources that are in the park, and that could include just maybe some of the memorials besides the natatorium or signage or statues.
There is, I believe, some new signage put up by the city with QR codes where you can walk around the park and scan with the QR code. It may still be up on their website. That was a project that Ms. Yee did not too long ago. And as far as historic signage, there isn't probably enough. We would love to sponsor some more signage within the park so that people know what's behind this park, right? That we often just run right through. So yes, good question in that it's something that we would like to work on also.
We have a question in the
Thank
chat.
you.
Was there a heiau originally on the site of the aquarium?
Not to my knowledge. I believe the only two are the one under Montserrat and the one up at La Pietra, but I could be wrong.
And I think there was one closer to the King's Palace in Waikīkī too, near the Royal Grove area.
Alethea, how did you personally get attracted? How long have you been with the KPPS? And was there a defining moment that really encouraged you to want to be part of the KPPS, to really work on this? If you don't mind answering that.
Oh, no, of course not. So I was living down by the park at that time, and I got to know Nancy Bannock, who was a force of nature and a force behind many things. And she was on the KPPS board. And I also got to know her good friend, Wesley Kinder, who I believe was involved in designing the Blaisdell. And they had been involved in this from the start. And so they kind of brought me in and roped me in, you could say. And so once they passed on, now it's kind of a legacy thing where those of us doing it are honored to be able to carry it on to do what we can to carry it on. So because those people were very inspiring, Cynthia Marney, a number of people who did that work, who went out and knocked on doors and fought against what looked like an impossible scenario.
I was so taken by that story, as I'm sure everyone here was kind of ears perked up over that story of the power of people standing up and the fact that they were mostly women and that they were admonished from not, misbehaving or doing that. And I'm just so grateful to all of you for the legacy and for what you did, because we wouldn't have that park if it wasn't for
Nancy
people like
genuinely
that.
was a force of nature. I remember
Yes.
her well. She fought very hard to try to preserve the natatorium as well.
Yes.
Thank goodness.
I think when I first arrived, it was the rare day I didn't get a call from her.
Alethea, are most of the board members on the KPPS right now? Have they been also on the board for a long time? And if that's so, are there plans to encourage, and maybe you're already doing that at your organization, kind of additional people coming in to kind of take that next journey for the next segment?
That's always a thought. Our board is currently a mix of people who've been serving for longer and newer people. And we have Jack Gilmar Emeritus advising us, and we need people with that singular goal of preserving the park. So when we find, when people come to us with that belief and intent, then that works out well.
Excellent. If anyone's interested, can they reach out to you through the website?
Our website is being redone, but through social media, yes.
Okay. And you're on Instagram. Did you say Instagram as well, or is it Facebook?
Facebook, and I think we have the matching Instagram, but I'll check.
Okay.
I want to thank you very much, Alethea, for the presentation. It was, like I said, very informative, and I think most of us don't realize the hard work behind almost anything of value in the world, right? We take these things for granted. So I'm hoping as we leave the lecture, we'll go out with a new spirit of conservation and preservation in mind.
Well,
Thank you for that, Bill. Go ahead,
yeah.
Alethea. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say we have big footsteps to fill.
Mm. Just the last question, Alethea, someone was asking about volunteer opportunities, which I think you broached a little bit in your talk. What's the best way for someone to get connected? Should it be social media?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. And we can share that afterwards. Kat is asking that the links to the social media, or if you Google, I'm sure you'll find it from the website.
Yes, you can just go to Facebook and search Kapi olani Park Preservation Society.
Okay, excellent. Alethea, I want to thank you so much. It was really fascinating. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. I want to thank my colleague, Shanae Kamaka-Wiwo-Ole, who's been providing technical support. Bill and I want to invite everyone to join us next week for the lecture next week, which is KT Eager's presentation on preserving Liliuokalani gardens in Hilo. So we'll be moving over to look at a beautiful park on Hawaii Island. That it's a 24-acre, for those who haven't been there, authentic Edo-style ornamental garden, which is the largest outside of Japan. And the Friends of Liliuokalani Gardens, which KT Eager is president of that organization, she'll be speaking about the park, its elements, and ongoing preservation efforts. We encourage you to sign up for the HHF e-newsletter at historichawaii.org to please take the survey afterward. And if you feel inspired and compelled to support Historic Hawaii Foundation and also Kapi olani Park Preservation Society, please do so. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And Bill, did you have closing words?
Well, I just want to mention, Marissa, you can simply contact Historic Hawaii Foundation, and someone there will reach back to you. You had a question about getting in touch with them. So
thank you.
Anyway, thank you. I just want to say thank you all for attending. I think this is always a great series. We always learn a lot. I hope we see you all next week as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your great work, Alethea, and your whole team. A hui hou.